The throne is not inherited, it is not bestowed by applause, nor purchased with favor. The throne is claimed in silence. Before any empire is ruled, before any decree is given, the sovereign must sit in the throne within. And that throne is found not in celebration, but in stillness. I begin not with noise, for noise is the shield of the hollow. I begin with silence, because silence does not lie. It reveals, it cuts, it strips a man of the illusions he has borrowed from the crowd and returns him to the bloodline of his will. In the beginning, there must be a quiet command from within. This is not a welcome. It is a reckoning. If you cannot hear yourself in the silence, you are unfit to command another. I do not tolerate those who fear silence. They are cowards dressed in ceremony. They speak often, but say nothing. They surround themselves with movement and voices, but none of it belongs to them. They flee from stillness, because stillness reveals the truth they are not yet enthroned. Their mind is not sovereign, their thoughts not chosen, their actions not commanded. A man who cannot sit alone without trembling, who cannot strip away the voices of the world and face the mirror of himself, has no right to issue orders. His rule will be mimicry. His authority will be borrowed. His decisions will be noise repeated louder. He will fall, not because he was conquered, but because he was never sovereign. The world has confused charisma with command. I correct this error. A sovereign does not perform, he reigns. His presence does not rise with volume, it deepens with silence. The man who needs a crowd to feel powerful is not powerful, he is dependent. And dependency is treason to the throne within. The sovereign walks into the chamber of stillness, unarmed, and does not flinch. He sits where others squirm. He listens where others speak. He hears what is unspeakable to the restless, the voice of his own resolve. In silence, I found my decree. In silence, I summoned will from fog. In silence, I became untouchable, not because I was louder than others, but because I no longer needed to be heard. The throne within does not tolerate disorder. It demands alignment. To sit in it requires exiling weakness. It requires the elimination of contradiction. If you think one way and act another, if your word is not your blade, if your loyalty shifts with wind, you are not seated. You are drifting. Silence exposes this. That is why the weak avoid it. They fear the voice that will call them out. The voice that asks, who rules here? Who gives the orders? What is your command? And if the answer is stammering, if the answer is borrowed from others, if the answer is the echo of a softer age, then silence has already judged you. You are not king. You are subject to chaos, ruled by noise, unfit for legacy. Every kingdom begins with the decision made in the dark, not in consultation, not in comfort, not in a room of applause. It begins in solitude, where the man confronts himself. I have sat with my thoughts until they broke. I have waited in stillness until the storm within obeyed. I have watched weaker men crumble at the absence of stimulus. Their identity evaporated without mirrors to admire them. Their will disappeared without voices to affirm them. I knew then, silence is the first trial of command. If you cannot hold yourself in its grip, you will not hold others in yours. You will seek their approval. You will fear their rejection. You will rule by consensus, which is to say, you will not rule at all. When a man commands from silence, every word he speaks carries the weight of the unsaid. He does not justify. He does not persuade. He does not chase reaction. He issues. His voice has gravity because it was forged in gravity. He has no need for volume because his presence is weight. When I speak, I do so from silence. Not because I lack things to say, but because I speak only when speech is final. There are no drafts in my voice. I do not think aloud. I decide inwardly and declare outwardly. That is the order. That is the throne. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the absence of chaos. In a world of noise, silence is not empty, it is full of judgment. It asks every man to account for his inner kingdom. Is it ordered? Is it loyal? Does it obey? Or is it divided, mutinous, swayed by every wind of emotion and opinion? When I sit in silence, I audit my empire. I summon each thought, each motive, and ask, are you loyal to the crown? I expel those that are not. I exile doubt. I banish indecision. I execute weakness before it seeds rebellion. My command begins within. I do not seek to conquer until I have conquered self, and that war is waged in stillness, not speech. A man is not sovereign if his mind is not disciplined. Discipline is not action alone. It is thought commanded, emotion subjected, desire ruled. This cannot be faked. It cannot be performed. It must be forged through silence, through the unflinching gaze at oneself, through the decision to remain when everything within screams to flee. This is where the sovereign is born, not in titles, not in applause, in silence, where no one watches, where no one claps, where no one saves you. Only then, when you command yourself absolutely, are you worthy to command another. Let them chase noise, let them fear stillness. I will remain in the chamber where true empires are born, the chamber without sound, the throne without cushion, the mirror without distortion. I do not decorate it with comfort. I do not warm it with praise. I let it remain what it is, cold, sharp, final. Because in that space, I remember what I am. I am not here to be accepted. I am here to reign. And reign begins where noise ends. I have seen generals lose battles because they could not withstand silence. They rushed decisions to avoid their own thoughts. They mistook panic for urgency. They confused movement with action. They reacted where they should have ruled. They sought counsel where they should have commanded. And their empires fell, not to greater armies, but to their own inner disorder. I do not repeat their error. I dwell in silence until the answer comes not from fear, but from fire. Until the decision is not reaction, but resolve. The man who claims the throne within claims all else, because once you command your own mind, nothing external can conquer you, not opinion, not insult, not circumstance. You become still, not static, but unmoved, like a fortress, like a crown of steel, and from that place you issue law, unshakable. Final, this is the beginning, the only beginning, all else is noise. The man who flinches in silence is already conquered, not by another, but by himself. I do not appoint such men to stand beside me, for I cannot entrust command to those who are afraid of what they are without a script. A commander must be forged in stillness, because command is not a performance. It is not spoken into being. It is earned in the crucible of self-confrontation. I have seen men with fine titles, polished rhetoric, and loud followings unravel the moment silence surrounded them. Their posture collapsed, their clarity vanished. They looked around, searching for sound to tether them, for applause to anchor them, for noise to distract them from the hollowness of their foundation. They feared what the absence of reaction would reveal. And what it revealed was this: they do not rule themselves. Therefore, they cannot rule anything. A man who cannot dwell in quiet cannot dwell in truth. He avoids it because it burns. He fills the air with declarations not to lead, but to drown the voice of self-doubt. He makes noise not to communicate, but to silence the silence. This is not power. It is panic dressed as confidence. It is the trembling of an untested will. The sovereign does not tremble. He does not pad his presence with noise. He lets silence speak for him. And when he does speak, it is only because the silence has already delivered the verdict inside. The weak speak to build their confidence. The sovereign speaks because his confidence is already law. Command is a heavy crown. It does not rest on a brow that shifts with discomfort. It cannot be worn by one who needs reassurance to act. When a man cannot sit still without fidgeting, cannot make a decision without noise, to mask the uncertainty, he is not ready. He is dangerous. Because a man who fears silence will always seek validation, and validation is the leash of the unsovereign. I do not allow leashes in my court. I allow only those who have passed the trial of stillness, those who have walked into the void of their own mind and returned bearing discipline. Until then, they are spectators of command, not stewards of it. Every order I give is built on the foundation that I do not need to give it. That is the paradox of command. The man who must speak to prove he is in control is not in control. The one who speaks only after mastery of the inner realm does not need to prove anything. His presence declares it. To reach this, a man must first submit to silence, not once, not for a ritual, but as a way of being. It is only in that quiet that the false parts of him begin to fall away. The borrowed thoughts, the second-hand values, the inherited fears. They rot in the silence. And what remains, when all that is false has burned away, is the sovereign self, unbending, unafraid, and unwilling to negotiate with weakness. I have no patience for men who react. Reaction is the domain of the undisciplined. They hear something, they say something. They feel discomfort, they act. They mistake movement for strategy. But reaction is noise. It is the mind admitting it has no command, and so it follows impulse. A ruler does not react. He responds. He calculates, he waits, and above all, he listens to what is not being said. This skill can only be learned in silence. When the world is quiet, you begin to hear the machinery of your own thought. You begin to see which voices within are loyal and which are treasonous. The man who cannot stand that scrutiny will distract himself with speech. He will speak too soon, decide too fast, move too broadly, and in doing so, lose the very thing he thought he was securing control. Trust does not belong to the loud. It belongs to the unmoved. The man who needs to be seen, to be heard, to be praised. He cannot be trusted with the burdens of command. Because when silence comes, and it always comes, he will crumble. He will call meetings, issue statements, change directions, all to avoid confronting the vacuum of his own authority. The sovereign, by contrast, welcomes silence. He expects it. It is in that vacuum that he sharpens his decree. In that vacuum, he measures his own presence and asks, "Is it enough?" If it is not, he does not flee. He fortifies. And if it is, he waits until the moment to act is no longer an option, but a necessity. Then, and only then, he moves. And when he moves, there is no hesitation, no adjustment, no apology. The movement becomes law. Most men confuse constant activity with strength. They are afraid to stop because in stillness they are exposed. I have learned the opposite. Strength is revealed in stillness. When nothing is moving, when no one is listening, when there is no spotlight, what remains is the truth of who you are. The sovereign builds in that place. He does not perform his virtue, he verifies it alone. The man who fears silence is not just avoiding quiet, he is avoiding audit. He knows on some level that the self he presents would not survive stillness. So he clings to momentum as proof of purpose. But momentum without aim is noise, and noise, repeated long enough, becomes delusion. I have sat in silence until my own voice sounded foreign. I have emptied myself of every impulse, every inherited instinct, every desire that did not arise from the throne within. This is the work. Not motivational, not decorative, not public. This is the sovereign's labor, brutal, cold, private. The weak reject it. They call it unnecessary. They say, not everyone is built that way. And they are correct. Not everyone is built for the throne. Most are built to obey, and they obey those who have done what they could not survive the silence and emerge sharper than before. A ruler who fears silence will build a court of noise. He will appoint flatterers instead of advisors. He will mistake feedback for loyalty. He will surround himself with applause and become deaf to consequence. I strip away all such comforts. I welcome only those who can sit in a room and say nothing, and not because they have nothing to say, but because they are measuring everything. The man who speaks before his thought is finished is not sovereign, he is desperate. And desperation has no place in the architecture of rule. This is why I watch before I act. This is why I sit while others race. I know what they do not, that command is not earned in activity, but in clarity. That clarity is born in silence, and that silence is not a pause. It is a weapon. I use it to carve through illusion. I use it to test my edge. I use it to separate my will from my wants. And in doing so, I remain untouchable. I do not need to react. I have already decided. I do not seek approval. I have already ruled. Let the weak flinch. Let them speak to silence their fear. Let them believe command is found in movement. I will remain in the quiet where the foundations of empire are forged, not with noise, but with will, not with praise, but with presence, not with reaction, but with decree. Noise is not harmless. It is the refuge of the undisciplined. It is the mask of the unformed. Those who cannot rule their inner realm turn to noise to shield their deficiency. They gather distractions around them like peasants hoarding bread before a siege, terrified of what the silence might expose. I have seen men fill their days with meetings, their nights with entertainment, their thoughts with repetition, and call it productivity. They are not building an empire. They are fleeing from the absence of one. Their noise is not structure. It is scaffolding without stone, echoing with the hollowness of unclaimed command. The sovereign does not make such errors. I do not confuse motion with purpose, nor sound with strength. I let noise fall away. And what remains, when all the distractions have died, is will. Weak men dress their fear in stimulation. They surround themselves with sound, with screens, with opinions. Because they fear the moment when all of it stops. They fear what they will find when there is nothing left to listen to but their own mind. That fear is a verdict. It declares them unfit. Because he who fears his own mind cannot be trusted with the minds of others. A man who needs constant input to remain certain has no certainty of his own. He borrows strength from the crowd, and the crowd is ever changing. I do not borrow, I possess. And what I possess is born in the fire that noise cannot enter. I do not call it peace. Peace is a fiction for the soft. What I create in silence is dominion. I do not retreat into quiet to rest. I enter it to build. While others use noise to escape their weakness, I use silence to confront mine. It is there that I test the edge of my reason. It is there that I expose the cracks in my own structure. I do not hide from the verdict, I issue it. That is what separates the sovereign from the self-deceived. The weak avoid judgment. The ruler delivers it, first to himself, then to the world. Look at the habits of those who fail. They are addicted to interruption. They wake with noise. They move with noise. They sleep with noise. They cannot complete a thought without consulting a device. They need music to think, voices to feel, motion to mean. Their minds are cluttered, not focused. Their actions are reactive, not deliberate. Their attention is not commanded. It is harvested by lesser forces. I do not operate in such a state. My attention is not a marketplace. It is a sword. I direct it with precision. I do not allow it to be pulled by novelty, by emotion, by shallow urgency. I train it and I guard it. Because what a man cannot hold, he cannot wield, and what he cannot wield, he will one day kneel before. The noise of the world is not accidental, it is engineered. It is the design of those who benefit when men forget their own will. The sovereign does not participate. He is not a consumer of chaos. He does not scroll, does not crave, does not plead for updates. He remains. He selects. He discards. Because he knows every distraction is a theft, and every theft tolerated is a signal to the inner court that discipline has fallen. I do not let such thieves enter. I guard my gate. I decide what enters my mind, and in doing so, I preserve the only territory that matters, the throne within. Even in moments of action, I do not allow noise to invade. I do not speak merely to fill space. I do not act to be seen. I do not decide to appear decisive. My words are rare because they are final. My movements are deliberate because they are the fruit of inner command. The undisciplined believe power is shown in quantity. More tasks, more meetings, more expressions, more announcements. But I know power is shown in restraint. It is what you do not say that defines you. It is what you do not do that clarifies your intent. The sovereign is not known by the number of his commands, but by the silence from which they emerge. Noise is not a neutral force. It is corrosion. It eats certainty. It dissolves vision. It turns the sharp blade of decision into a dull blur of hesitation. A man who allows too much input loses the clarity to issue output. His voice becomes a collage of others, his path a maze of mirrors. I do not walk that maze, I break it. And I walk alone if I must, because I would rather advance in isolation than be led by a mob's confusion. I have no need to prove myself to the unsovereign. Their judgment is irrelevant. Their praise is noise. Their criticism is static. The only voice I listen to is the one I forged in silence, sharpened by solitude and crowned with discipline. You may think noise is comfort, that silence is lonely. That is how the untrained mind speaks. But I tell you, noise is dependency, and silence is mastery. Those who need noise need to be told who they are. Those who endure silence know who they are. I do not need music to think, a group to decide, or a stimulus to feel alive. My mind is complete without adornment. My will is sovereign without affirmation. That is the requirement of rule. Until you can command your thoughts in a room of stillness, you have no throne, only costume. The greatest threat to sovereignty today is not war, but noise. Not invasion, but inundation. The slow, constant erosion of will by the friction of the unnecessary. The sovereign guards against this not with walls, but with refusal. He says no, quietly, absolutely, relentlessly. No to what is unworthy. No to what is irrelevant. No to what distracts. Not with anger, not with panic, but with calm certainty. Because the throne does not defend itself with volume. It defends itself with boundaries. I have seen what noise has done to men of promise. I have seen their thoughts diluted, their instincts blunted, their discipline scattered. They sought greatness, but allowed themselves to be ruled by input. They believed the lie that to be informed is to be empowered. But information without command is chaos. The sovereign does not hoard information. He selects it, applies it, and discards the rest. His power lies not in knowing everything, but in deciding what matters. And decision, true decision, can only arise from silence, from the place where all other voices have been cast out, from the place where only the sovereign remains. The man who cannot be alone with himself cannot be trusted with others. The man who must be surrounded by sound to think cannot be trusted to speak. The man who requires constant stimulation to act cannot be trusted to lead. I allow none of these men near my counsel. Let them entertain themselves to ruin. Let them speak until they can no longer hear themselves. Let them scroll, listen, react, and fade. I remain, I endure, I command. Let this be understood. Noise is not the price of modern life. It is the tax on undisciplined minds. The sovereign does not pay it. He exempts himself through force, through clarity, through will. I choose silence, not because I hate sound, but because I hate confusion. I do not reject the world, I organize it. I do not withdraw from action, I act with precision. And I do not fear stillness, because I have ruled there. That is why I command. That is why I last. I do not rise for applause. I do not rule to be seen. The sovereign is unmoved by clamor, for he does not answer to the noise of the crowd. A ruler who listens for the cheers of the masses is already dethroned. He is not seated in power. He is suspended by popularity, waiting for the next fluctuation of affection to determine his worth. That is not command. That is captivity. I do not permit such weakness in my dominion. I do not feed on praise. I feed on clarity. The fire that sustains my decree does not come from the mouths of others. It comes from the flame that silence guards and noise attempts to smother. That flame is internal, untouched, self-sustaining, and it cannot be faked. There is a sickness in the world. Men believe they must be validated to act. They crave reaction. They measure their movements by the echo they produce. But echo is not substance. Echo is the shadow of action, not its origin. I act whether anyone watches or not. I declare not because it will be heard, but because it is already true. I do not consult the world before I command it. The world is not my mirror. It is my subject. Its clamor may rise, its voices may swell, but I remain untouched by the hysteria of the moment. The sovereign does not change course because the wind howls louder. He sails by inner compass, and he silences storms by not answering them. To be unmoved is not to be passive, it is to be deliberate, it is to recognize that reaction is surrender. The man who responds to every call, every complaint, every cheer is not leading, he is dancing, and dancers do not build empires, they entertain, then they vanish. The sovereign is not on stage, he is on the throne. He speaks when speaking alters reality. He moves when movement shifts the earth. Until then, he observes, coldly, calculatingly, without needing to be affirmed. Because the one who needs affirmation does not yet know himself. In the court of power, the loudest voice is not the strongest. The loudest voice is usually the most frightened. Noise is often a cover for the absence of order. You will see it in weak rulers, their need to announce, to declare, to repeat. They shout to hide their fear that their words carry no weight. But repetition does not create authority. Discipline does. Silence does. The voice of true power does not need to be repeated. It is final. And finality does not require agreement. It requires command. When I decree, it is not to invite debate. It is to shape the world according to the will that I have already forged in solitude. If others approve, it is irrelevant. If others disapprove, it is irrelevant. The decision was not theirs to begin with. I do not outsource my judgment to the reactions of the realm. The moment a ruler does that, he has stepped down. He has become a manager of consensus, not a maker of destiny. Consensus is not power. It is noise in disguise. Understand this: the more a man craves to be seen, the less he is capable of seeing. The more he needs to be heard, the less he hears what matters. The sovereign does not crave the attention of the crowd. He craves alignment with his purpose. He does not enter the room wondering who will approve. He enters knowing who he is. And because he knows, approval becomes redundant. He does not seek loyalty through charm. He demands it through example, through action, through discipline, and through the strength to be still when the weak clamor for motion. I do not surround myself with flatterers. Flattery is poison wrapped in velvet. It weakens the edge. It seduces the sovereign into believing that being liked is the same as being right. But the throne is not a popularity contest. It is a furnace. It does not warm. It tests. Those who sit on it must be prepared to be alone, to be misunderstood, to be hated, and to rule anyway. Because the goal is not affection. The goal is alignment with the eternal laws of power, discipline, and sovereignty. I do not adjust to be liked. I adjust to be more precise. I do not act to inspire applause. I act to impose order. Noise seeks to distract. Applause seeks to addict. But I remain untouched. I do not inhale the cheers, so I do not exhale panic when they turn to jeers. I remain, because the fire I follow does not flicker with the moods of men. It burns steady, deep within. The sovereign's loyalty is not to sentiment, it is to standard. He rules not because others want him to, but because he is the only one who can. There is a mistake made by the untrained. They believe power must always be visible, audible, constant. But real power is quiet. Real power is calm. Real power does not chase, it chooses. It does not demand attention. It commands respect through presence alone. You will recognize it in the way I do not explain, in the way I do not justify, in the way I can wait while others rush, speak only when the word is necessary, and act when action is final. That is not apathy. That is sovereign patience. It is the patience of a man who does not doubt the throne upon which he sits. The masses will always demand noise. They will call it transparency, call it openness, call it progress. But I call it dilution. The more a ruler speaks to be accepted, the less he governs. The more he adjusts to be liked, the more he betrays the laws that gave him rule. I betray nothing. I uphold the code that silence taught me. That clarity demands. That legacy requires. The code is not to be liked. It is to be unbreakable. even when misunderstood, especially then. In the days of weakness, you will see leaders flinch. They will issue a command and then retract it when noise rises. They will apologize to preserve favor. They will explain to regain approval. But I do not apologize for command. I do not explain decree. I do not seek to be excused. I am not running for anything. I am enthroned. My voice is not a request. It is law. And law does not bend to clamor. Law bends only to the sovereign who forged it. Let the court be filled with voices. Let the world be loud. I do not raise my voice to meet it. I lower the world to my standard. I do not respond to the noise. I replace it with silence that cannot be argued with, a silence earned through fire, through solitude, through refusal to be swayed. I do not crave reaction. I impose order. That is the difference between the sovereign and the subject. The subject reacts. The sovereign rules. There is no throne without solitude. There is no rule without exile. The sovereign is not forged among men, but away from them, alone, where only his will remains to answer the silence. Isolation is not an accident of power, it is its origin. The weak believe leadership is built by consensus, by visibility, by applause. But I tell you this, the crown is granted in the moment. No one watches, no one understands, and no one supports. It is in the moment of absolute inner separation that a man either rises or breaks. I have chosen to rise, not once, but repeatedly, because isolation is not a phase, it is a forge. And every time I return to it, I return sharper, colder, truer. The crowd cannot give you power. At best, they can give you noise. But noise is borrowed. Power must be built, and it can only be built in silence, where all that distracts is gone, and only the self remains. The true self, not the version sculpted by approval, not the version addicted to recognition. The version that breathes without audience, stands without affirmation, and commands without echo. That self is rare. That self is royal. And it can only emerge through deliberate solitude, not through temporary retreat, but through sovereign choice. I do not wait to be alone. I choose it. Because I know what grows in solitude rules in the world. The man who fears isolation will always be at the mercy of companionship. He will compromise to avoid loneliness. He will soften to remain accepted. He will dilute his standard to stay embraced. I do none of these things. I would rather walk alone with fire than among many with fog. The sovereign does not fear being misunderstood. He expects it. He does not shrink when others withdraw. He does not beg to be included. He does not ask to be followed. He moves by inner decree, and those who can endure the silence of his presence may follow if they wish, but he never waits for them. I have seen rulers surround themselves with advisors, assistants, admirers. They believe proximity creates strength, but proximity without solitude creates dependency. When every decision must be confirmed, when every move must be echoed, when every instinct must be validated, the ruler is not ruling, he is polling. And a man who polls cannot lead. A man who waits for others before acting has already surrendered the one thing command cannot function without internal certainty. I do not poll. I do not wait. I decide. And I do it from silence, because silence sharpens. Isolation clarifies, and solitude over time removes all that is not essential. That is why I am never burdened by noise. I do not carry it. Let others call it loneliness. Let them pity the stillness of the sovereign. I do not. I recognize it as the birthplace of discipline. without the interruptions of the external world, without the constant negotiation of lesser minds, without the subtle influence of approval or rejection, the sovereign discovers something no one else can give him: pure self-direction. It is only in that space that the man learns if he is truly aligned or merely performing alignment. I do not perform, I embody. My life is not shaped by reaction, it is shaped by principle, and principle must be tested alone, or it does not exist at all. Most men crave company to avoid confrontation, not with others, but with themselves. They fear the silence between words, the emptiness between encounters, the mirror that no one else is holding up. They do not wish to meet themselves unguarded. But I do. I demand it. Because a man who cannot face his own unfiltered self is not yet worthy of command. He may speak well, he may act decisively, but if it is not forged in solitude, it will crack under pressure, and when it cracks, the cost is paid by all who follow him. I do not permit such risk in my empire. I rule myself before I rule others. That is the law. That is the code. In solitude, all excuses die. There is no one to blame, no one to impress, no audience to tailor to, no script to follow. There is only truth, and that truth either elevates or destroys. For the undisciplined, solitude is unbearable, because it removes every mask. For the sovereign, solitude is liberation, because it removes every chain. I do not decorate solitude with fantasy, I face it with force. I sharpen my resolve in its silence, I wield its judgment without flinching, and from that judgment I grow stronger than those who hide among noise ever will. Do not mistake this for emotional distance. It is not numbness, it is sovereignty. To feel is not to obey emotion. To be aware is not to be ruled by awareness. I feel, I see. But I command my response. And I learned this only in solitude, only when the emotions were mine and mine alone, only when no one watched to reward stoicism or punish vulnerability, only when the only voice I could answer to was the one inside. That is how a man becomes ruler, not by winning the favor of the world, but by conquering himself when no one watches. Isolation is not the absence of support. It is the presence of inner authority. I do not avoid it. I demand it. I build spaces in which only I remain, not as an escape, but as a chamber of reckoning. Because in that chamber, there are no enemies but the undisciplined self. And I do not leave until he is dealt with. I do not emerge until the throne within is re-secured. No empire has fallen from solitude, but many have fallen because the sovereign feared it. I do not fear it. I make it a ritual. I make it a rite. I make it a law of my reign. The man who cannot endure being unseen will eventually act to be noticed. That is his weakness. He will interrupt silence with drama. He will trade sovereignty for attention. I do not. Let them forget my name for a while. Let them wonder where I am. I do not need to be witnessed to be at work. My silence is not absence, it is ascension. What I build in private becomes what they will later kneel before. And when I return, I do not return as I was. I return colder, clearer, deeper. Because solitude is not an escape from duty, it is the rehearsal of it. It is where the sovereign prepares the blade, and only when it is sharp do I strike. I do not need the company of many. I need the presence of command, and command requires space to breathe. It requires room to question, to destroy, to reforge. I do not ask for understanding in these seasons. I do not explain them. I disappear with purpose, because disappearance is not death. It is discipline. It is the ritual of kings. The world will always be loud, but the sovereign will always be quiet first, so that when he does speak, all listen. Not because he demanded attention, but because he earned silence. This is where rule begins, in the echoless halls of your own mind, in the nights where no one answers, in the decisions that no one applauds, in the strength built in the absence of witnesses. That is where the sovereign is born, and if you cannot enter that space willingly, remain outside the gates of command. For inside there is no comfort, only fire, and only those who walk into the fire alone return carrying law. Silence is not merely an absence, it is a mirror, and like all mirrors, it does not lie. It reflects what is, not what you wish to project. Most men cannot look into it without flinching, because what they see is not command, but chaos. Not purpose, but noise. Their minds are filled with fragments, unfinished intentions, unexamined motives, borrowed beliefs. The mirror of silence shows them this clearly, and they recoil. But the sovereign does not recoil. He stares, he studies, he stands his ground. Because only the man who can hold his own gaze without turning away is fit to issue orders to others. Only the one who has subdued the internal rebellion can be trusted to lead in the external world. You may command armies, you may hold titles, you may sit upon thrones made of gold, but if you cannot face your own mind without distraction, you are not sovereign. You are impersonating power, and no amount of control over others can compensate for the absence of control within. I do not accept such fraudulence. I do not build my rule on illusion. I strip it away, relentlessly. I let silence show me every fracture, every weakness, every inconsistency, because I would rather be wounded by truth than flattered by comfort. This is not humility, this is war. War against the self that resists clarity, resists correction, resists the mirror. I fight it daily. I win. And from that private victory, all public power flows. The mirror of silence is brutal because it offers no narrative. It does not tell stories. It shows structure. And if the structure of your inner world is unsound, if your decisions are rooted in fear, your desires unexamined, your loyalties divided, it will be revealed. In silence, there is no audience to manipulate, no applause to distort, no enemy to blame. There is only you. And this is why most will never command. They cannot survive that level of exposure. Their strength is theatrical, their focus performative. But the sovereign lives beneath performance. He does not act a role. He governs a domain. And that governance begins with self. There is a reason I do not fear the silence before a decision, that I do not rush to fill the space between questions and answers. It is because I have trained in that void. I have sat within it until it spoke, until it no longer frightened me, until its reflection became familiar, not foreign. The weak misinterpret this as delay. But I do not delay. I measure. I verify. I inspect the foundations before I build the command, because I know what weak men do, not that power built on unexamined foundations will collapse. The mirror of silence is the only inspection worth trusting. It sees everything, and what it sees cannot be hidden. Many men speak about awareness. They speak of mindfulness, of insight, of vision. But they speak from borrowed places. They repeat language they have not earned. Because awareness cannot be purchased, it cannot be faked, it can only be confronted. And confrontation happens when there is no noise to hide behind. when every voice is silenced and only the raw truth remains. That truth is not gentle, it is not poetic, it is not sentimental, it is cold, surgical, final. The sovereign does not decorate it, he uses it, he builds with it. Because a ruler who builds from false perception will rule over a false kingdom, and such kingdoms do not last. I do not confuse observation with understanding. To observe is to see what is outside. To understand is to see what is within. And what is within can only be accessed through silence, not silence as a tactic, silence as a condition, as a way of being, as a sword that cuts through illusion, both yours and others. The man who fears this silence will misread others, because he has misread himself. He will mislead others because he has not led himself. He will mistake confusion for complexity and emotion for truth. I do not make these errors. I silence the noise within so I can hear what no one else is listening to. That is the sovereign's gift, to perceive reality not as it is spoken, but as it is. You will notice it in my decisions. They are not rushed, but they are absolute, because they were forged in stillness, not pressured into existence. While others guess, I know. While others hesitate, I act. While others over-explain, I execute. And I do not explain my certainty to those who still avoid the mirror. I do not lower my clarity to accommodate their blur. Let them speak of confusion. Let them debate endlessly. I do not debate, I decree. Because my decrees are not opinions, they are results of observation uncorrupted by noise. There is an arrogance in believing you know yourself without silence, that because you have thoughts, you understand them. But thought without stillness is static. It is scattered, reflexive, reactive. It is not will, it is wind. I do not operate from wind, I operate from steel. My thoughts are not guests, they are soldiers, disciplined, trained, aligned, and that alignment was not inherited. It was earned, in the solitude of the mirror, where no thought was exempt from scrutiny, where no belief was too precious to question, where no feeling was allowed to reign unless it proved its loyalty to the throne. I do not allow rogue thoughts to rule. I do not allow ancient fears to dress themselves in new language. I do not allow unresolved weakness to camouflage as wisdom. I trace every impulse to its root, and if that root does not serve my sovereignty, I burn it. This is not cruelty, this is command. The world is ruled by the few who are willing to wage war against their internal disorder. I wage that war, daily, quietly, absolutely. Let others fill journals with reflections they never act on. Let them talk endlessly about what they feel, what they fear, what they hope. I do not talk. I audit. I measure. I enforce. The mirror of silence is my counsel, and from its clarity I derive force. I do not require interpretation because I have eradicated confusion. That is why my words are not exploratory. They are final. That is why my presence is not dramatic. It is defining. Men ask what the path to command looks like. They expect rituals, techniques, steps. I give them this sit alone, without movement, without input, and face your thoughts without excuse. Let the silence ask you what you truly serve. Let it ask you what you truly want. Let it ask you whether your actions match your values. And do not move until you have answers you would bet your kingdom on. Most will never finish this trial. They will flee before the silence speaks. But those who remain, those who endure, those who answer, those are the ones who rise. Those are the ones I trust. Those are the ones I call sovereign. You may conquer lands, command armies, build empires, but if you have not mastered your reflection, you are still a servant to distraction, a servant to doubt, a servant to the parts of you refuse to face. I do not serve, I do not flinch, I look, I see, and then I rule. To command others without first commanding the void within is to build a kingdom on sand and believe it stone. Power over people is not the beginning. It is the consequence. It is the echo of a deeper conquest, one no witness applauds and no enemy sees. I speak of the conquest of the void, the barren field of self where all distraction dies, where silence reigns, and where the sovereign either emerges or dissolves. There is no deception in the void, no narrative, no hand to hold. Only space, raw and unrelenting. And it is this space, not the throne room, that reveals whether a man is worthy to command. I have walked that void unaccompanied. I did not bring my titles, I did not carry my name. I entered with nothing but will, and I emerged forged, not by comfort, not by affirmation, but by the cold discipline of enduring my own emptiness. The weak cannot bear emptiness. It frightens them. They rush to fill it with opinions, entertainment, movement, companionship. They call it activity. I call it avoidance. They fear what they will find when all noise has ended. And rightly so, because when the crowd disappears, when the music stops, when the lights fade, what remains is the man alone with the truth of himself. Most cannot bear that confrontation. They were never trained to face themselves. They were trained to perform, to belong, to adjust. But sovereignty is not granted to the adjusted. It is granted to the absolute, and absolutes are not born in noise. They are born in the void. I do not chase stimulation. I do not escape discomfort. I walk into it as one enters a battlefield, with awareness, with control, with command. The void does not terrify me, it sharpens me. I enter it to separate signal from static, to strip every layer of delusion, every trace of inherited belief, every shadow of fear. And what is left when the stripping is complete is command. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. It is not the command of voice, but of presence, the kind that reshapes rooms without raising volume, the kind that decides, and in deciding, redefines the possible. This is not granted by others. This is earned in the quiet furnace of inner dominion. There are rulers who avoid the void. They rule by spectacle, by persuasion, by performance. But beneath their robe is a trembling will. I do not tremble. I do not need performance. I do not explain, entertain, or soften. Because the void trained me to be still when all else screams to flee. The void taught me how to wait without weakness, to listen without reacting, to stand without leaning. In the void, no one watches. That is why it is sacred, because only there does the sovereign meet himself and discover either he has built the inner throne or he has built nothing. Understand this: all outer command is illusion if inner chaos rules unchecked. You cannot issue order to others while you are ruled by emotional disarray. You cannot lead if your impulses lead you, and those impulses, the ones most deny, suppress, excuse, are not silenced by willpower alone. They are silenced by sovereign integration, not suppression, but submission. I do not banish parts of myself out of fear. I bring them to the throne and require their allegiance. Every thought, every shadow, every instinct must kneel. If it resists, I do not flinch. I remain still, and in that stillness I command. not with fury, with finality. The void is not emptiness. It is order waiting to be claimed. Most never stay long enough to see it. They interpret the silence as absence, but the sovereign knows what appears empty is full of instruction. The noise of the world may be louder, but it is not wiser. The void teaches what noise cannot: patience without passivity, power without pressure, peace without submission. This is why I return to it again and again. I do not outgrow the void, I deepen in it. Because even the throne rusts without retreat, even the blade dulls without re-sharpening in solitude. Let others distract themselves with motion. Let them believe that energy equals effectiveness. I do not move to escape. I move only after the void has confirmed my direction. And when I do move, there is no hesitation, there is no return. I do not backtrack because I do not guess. I wait until movement becomes decree, and in that decree there is force. Because it is not the product of doubt, it is the result of alignment. Alignment not with circumstance, but with internal law. And internal law is not a feeling. It is not a hope. It is not intuition. It is structure, forged in silence, tested in fire, anchored in truth. Most men confuse command with control. They believe if they can control outcomes, they are sovereign. But control is temporary. It bends to circumstance. Command is permanent. It shapes circumstance. Control requires grasping. Command requires grounding. I do not grip. I do not chase. I stand. And because I stand, the world arranges around me. Not in obedience to my noise, but in response to the stillness that precedes my word. Stillness is not inaction. It is the highest form of preparation. It is what makes the strike clean. It is what makes the word final. It is what makes the law endure. You may think leadership is built in front of people, but I tell you, leadership is built when no one sees, when no one knows what you endure, when no one claps for the restraint you choose, the battles you refuse, the doubts you dissolve without drama. These are the moments of true sovereignty, not the speech, not the ceremony, the silence, the internal execution of all that is unfit to serve. I do not seek recognition for this. I require only results. And the results speak without fanfare. They endure. They command. Because they were born in discipline, not noise. The void taught me how to separate want from need, emotion from principle, urgency from clarity. It taught me how to choose delay over doubt, stillness over showmanship, alignment over applause. And from that choosing came something the world cannot counterfeit: inner monarchy. Not monarchy as a symbol, but as a structure. One that needs no castle, no crown, no chorus. One that governs regardless of setting, that does not diminish when unacknowledged, that grows more potent the quieter it becomes. I no longer fear absence. I do not panic in voids. I do not flinch when the crowd vanishes. Because I know only the sovereign remains when all else is stripped. Only he governs when the light goes out. Only he endures when the world forgets his name. And when the light returns, he has not changed. He does not reintroduce himself. He does not reclaim status. He never lost it, because his power was never theirs to grant. It was always his, earned in the space they never entered, in the silence they never dared keep, in the void they never knew how to survive. I do not speak to be heard. I speak to shape. My words are not for volume, they are for incision. The sovereign does not issue language to fill silence. He issues it to cut through it. Every word I choose is a weapon. every sentence a strike, every declaration an edge. This is not conversation. This is command. The ruler who speaks casually, endlessly, impulsively, is no ruler at all. He is a performer hoping sound will compensate for absence of structure. I do not perform. I pronounce. I do not fill the air. I pierce it. Because the sovereign understands that the voice is not an outlet of emotion, but an instrument of decree. And if the instrument is played without restraint, the empire decays under its undisciplined music. I do not speak when uncertain. I do not speak when angry. I do not speak to relieve pressure. The world is filled with rulers who have not mastered the art of silence before speech. They react, they release, they ramble, and in doing so, they surrender the gravity of their own command. I have seen men reduce their authority with each word they speak, bleeding power from their mouths as if words cost nothing. But words are not free. They are sacred currency, and I spend them only when the exchange is worthy. The more a sovereign speaks without need, the more he reveals his own lack of structure. I speak because I must, not because I can. And when I do, it is final. There is no virtue in constant expression. It is not strength to speak often. It is strength to withhold until the moment of necessity, then to speak with such precision that no echo is needed. When the sovereign speaks, his word is not merely heard, it alters reality. Not because it is loud, but because it is true. It carries the force of prior stillness. It carries the weight of inner command. It is not noise layered upon noise. It is silence crystallized into blade. And a blade does not apologize. It cuts. I do not speak to explain. I do not speak to persuade. I do not speak to comfort. I do not seek to be understood by all. I do not dilute message for reception. I speak with clean edge, and the edge either awakens or wounds. But it never flatters. This is the duty of the sovereign tongue, not to entertain, not to appease, but to restore order. I do not hold court to be admired. I hold court to impose direction. My words are not democratic. They are not requests. They are thresholds. Once crossed, there is no return. This is how laws are born, not in conversation, but in declaration. Let the world speak itself dry. Let them confuse verbosity with virtue. I remain measured, because every word weakens the force of the next if not placed with ruthless intent. I do not speak until silence has spoken first, and only then, when what must be said becomes too powerful to contain, do I release it, not as discussion, but as decree. This is why my voice carries, because it is rare, because it is distilled, because it has been trained to strike, not to soothe. Many rulers fear silence after their speech. They rush to fill the space, to clarify, to explain, to soften. I do none of these. I let the silence stretch. I let it work. I let it make the meaning sharper, not safer. Because power does not rush to be understood. It expects the world to rise to it. If I must be misinterpreted, then so be it. My fidelity is not to perception, it is to truth, and the truth does not bend to comfort. I have witnessed men who once ruled falter because their tongue lacked restraint. They tried to dominate through noise, believing that repetition would become authority. But noise does not crown, it corrodes. Each unnecessary word eats at the structure of presence. Each emotional utterance replaces command with instability. You cannot both vent and reign. You must choose. I have chosen. I sealed the gates of my mouth until they served the kingdom, not the ego. I do not need to speak first. I do not need to speak long. I do not need to speak often. But when I speak, the room changes. Not because of who I am, but because of what I've mastered in silence. I speak only when the message is worthy of the stillness it breaks. And when the stillness returns, it does not undo the word, it reinforces it, because it was born from it. This is the sovereign rhythm: silence, clarity, declaration, silence again. Anything more is indulgence. Anything less is cowardice. There are moments when the world demands reaction, when it screams for the ruler to answer, to speak, to respond. That is when restraint matters most. That is when the sovereign listens, not to the world, but to the void behind the noise. I have waited days before speaking a sentence. I have endured storms without issuing a single word, because I knew the first sound would shape the field, and once spoken, it cannot be unmade. The weak fill these moments with statements. I fill them with command. And that command is never late. It arrives at the precise second it is most unshakable. The sovereign tongue is not just powerful because it is controlled. It is powerful because it is clean. There is no apology in it, no contradiction, no uncertainty. What I speak is what I build, and I do not build lightly. I do not allow emotion to dictate tone. I do not allow doubt to shape language. When I speak, it is not to test what I believe. It is to enforce what I already know. The tongue that seeks feedback is not sovereign. The tongue that delivers verdict is. I do not speak to feel better. I do not speak to be heard. I speak to realign reality with law, and law is not emotional. It is not reactive. It is not based on the crowd's comfort. It is based on what must endure. That is what I serve. Endurance, not excitement. Continuity, not attention. I do not enter conversations. I enter space and make it still. Then I speak. Once. And the world bends. Let others run their mouths. Let them drown their doubt in dialogue. Let them confuse expression with evolution. I do not evolve through talking. I evolve through structure, through reflection, through the ruthless economy of speech. I use fewer words because I've already won more inner battles. I speak less because I hear more. And what I hear is not surface. It is signal. It is need. And when need calls, I answer with precision, not poetry. My words are not meant to soothe you. They are meant to awaken or to sever. That is what blades do. They do not negotiate. They divide. And the sovereign tongue is a blade. Not everyone deserves to hear it. Not every moment is worthy of it. But when it strikes, it settles what uncertainty could not. That is power. Not just to speak, but to say the thing that ends all other words. A kingdom that forgets silence is already surrendered. Not to an enemy, not to a rebellion, but to erosion from within. No empire collapses in a moment. Collapse begins quietly, invisibly, long before the gates fall or the banners burn. It begins when the sovereign no longer returns to stillness, when the council replaces contemplation, when endless conversation replaces internal decree, when reaction becomes policy, when noise becomes the new law. I have seen such kingdoms, brilliant on the outside, hollow within, crumble not from defeat, but from disconnection. Disconnection from origin, from order, from the one place all-enduring authority must come from the silent throne within. There is no power where silence has not first ruled. There is no law that can last unless it was born in the void before voice. I do not speak because I wish to be heard. I do not act because I fear stillness. I return to silence because I understand its hierarchy. Silence is not beneath command, it is above it. It is the condition from which all legitimate command must emerge. Without silence, a leader becomes noise. Without silence, the state becomes performance. Without silence, the throne becomes a stage. And once you stand upon a stage, you are no longer sovereign. You are servant to the crowd's reaction. Let it be known when a ruler begins to fear stillness, he begins to fear himself. And when that fear is left unaddressed, it spreads through his advisors, through his laws, through his people. The court becomes louder, the decrees more frequent, the policies more erratic. This is not evolution, it is panic. It is the empire trying to drown its own reflection, terrified of what silence will reveal. I do not allow such erosion. I do not permit even a whisper of it within my domain. Where silence is exiled, weakness grows. And where weakness grows, treason follows. Silence is not withdrawal, it is dominance. The man who chooses silence does not retreat. He rises. He chooses not to speak because his presence already commands. He chooses not to respond because his alignment is already settled. The moment I see a kingdom ruled by chatter, I see a kingdom afraid. The confident do not need to explain. The ordered do not need to announce. The prepared do not need to rush. They act from silence, and in that silence is unbreakable precision. I do not reward urgency, I reward discipline, and discipline does not shout, it builds. When silence is removed from leadership, a strange thing happens. The truth becomes diluted, the center becomes blurred. Suddenly the ruler is everywhere and nowhere. He is reacting, updating, adjusting, constantly engaging with perception and never returning to origin. But perception is a fickle monarch. It rewards weakness with momentary praise and punishes strength with doubt. If you build a kingdom on perception, you are ruled by its moods. I build on law, law unshaken by emotion, law that begins in stillness and ends in enforcement. That is why my command endures. Because it does not tremble with applause. It does not dissolve with criticism. It does not seek safety. It seeks truth. Noise cannot produce clarity. It can only produce distraction. And distraction is what destroys great empires. Not in one stroke, but in fragments. 1,000 minor compromises, 1,000 unmeasured responses, 1,000 conversations that should have been silence. Until one day, the sovereign is no longer commanding from within, but begging for unity from without. I do not beg, I declare. Because I keep my silence sacred, I do not fill it with commentary, I do not pollute it with interpretation. I return to it as a king returns to his ancestral court, with reverence, with clarity, with law in my blood. Let others treat silence as absence. Let them treat stillness as laziness. Let them treat contemplation as inaction. They are not sovereign. They do not understand. They confuse volume with leadership, exposure with relevance, repetition with strength. They have never commanded from within. They have never sat in the invisible seat of power where nothing exists but will. I sit there daily. I do not need to be seen to be ruling. I do not need to be heard to be building. My throne does not vanish when the world looks away. It becomes sharper. A leader who cannot endure being misunderstood will betray silence for noise. He will start explaining when he should be executing. He will start engaging when he should be eliminating. I do not engage with confusion. I extinguish it. I do not soften my message to remain relatable. I harden it to remain sovereign. Because relatability is not a function of rule. It is a function of weakness. of compromise, of approval-seeking, and approval-seeking is death to command. I have no need to be liked. I have already been chosen, by discipline, by will, by fire. Silence is not merely a strategy, it is a territory. It is the first land every ruler must conquer. If you cannot hold the silence of your own mind, you cannot hold a nation. You will legislate from fear. You will act from insecurity. You will become louder, more frequent, more reactive, and each time you do, your power will shrink. Until one day you will speak, and no one will listen, not because they defy you, but because you taught them that your voice had no weight. I do not let that happen. I speak rarely so that when I do, the world listens, because the space between my words is not absence, it is thunder. The sovereign does not fear quiet halls, he does not fear empty rooms, he does not fear the long hours with no applause. Because he knows those hours are where alignment lives, he does not see loneliness as punishment, but as preservation. He does not interpret silence as threat, but as the soil from which all true law must rise. Without it, there is only noise, and noise, given time, becomes chaos. I do not rule chaos, I erase it. There will always be those who misunderstand the sovereign's silence. They will call it arrogance. They will call it hesitation. They will call it indifference. Let them. Their judgment is the sound of lesser courts. I do not explain my restraint to the undisciplined. I do not invite them into the inner sanctum. I do not dilute the edge of my rule to make it more palatable. Power is not a meal to be shared. It is a flame to be kept. And that flame is guarded best not by words, but by silence. When kingdoms fall, they do not fall from speechlessness. They fall from endless chatter, from rulers who no longer listen to the void, from decisions made too fast, too loud, too often. That is not rule, that is reaction, and reaction is the abdication of the inner throne. I do not react, I remain. And in remaining, I rule. Let this be the final word. A man who does not return to silence returns to nothing. He builds from borrowed materials. He commands with inherited tone. He lives with a crown made of echo. But the sovereign, the true sovereign, disappears into silence not to escape, but to enforce. He emerges from it not uncertain, but purified. Not lost, but inevitable. And when he speaks, it is not to be heard, it is to be obeyed.